Kessanar stood in the observation deck of the warship Eternal Ascent, his bioluminescent skin pulsing with irritation. The massive vessel cut through hyperspace like a blade through silk, carrying the entire Zenari collective fleet toward what should have been a simple rescue operation. But nothing involving humans was ever simple. He adjusted his gravity field slightly, letting himself float a few inches above the deck. It was a habit when he was thinking, and right now his mind churned with questions that had no logical answers. The holographic display before him showed Threshold 9, a small colony world on the edge of civilized space. It should have been empty by now. It should have been consumed. The Vexler swarm had broken through reality itself 3 weeks ago. They were creatures from beyond normal space, things that ate matter and energy with equal hunger. Every military strategist in the galaxy agreed that when the Vexler came, you ran. You evacuated. You lived to fight another day from a safer position. It was simple survival mathematics, except the humans did not do mathematics the way everyone else did. The reports make no sense, Ketzener said to Commander Velthari, who stood nearby monitoring the tactical feeds. 200 human Marines against a dimensional breach. They should have lasted hours at most. That was 4 standard days ago? Velthari's skin flickered blue with amusement. Humans rarely make sense, scholar. You should know this by now. Ketzener did know it. He had spent decades studying human history and culture, trying to understand how such a young species had spread so quickly across the stars. They had no natural gravity manipulation like the Zenari. They could not photosynthesize energy like the Chlorix. They possessed no telepathic hive mind like the Anthony Collective. They were just ... stubborn, painfully, irrationally stubborn. Their history was written in survival against impossible odds. Ice ages that should have killed them, they made fire and clothing. Predators they should have eaten, they made weapons and hunted back. Diseases that should have ended them, they made medicine and kept going. Wars that should have destroyed their entire species, they rebuilt and somehow learned slowly to be better. I still do not understand why we must risk the fleet for them, Ketzener said. They chose to stay. They chose to fight a battle they cannot win. Perhaps, Velthari said, but they chose to fight so others could escape. The civilian transports made it out because those Marines bought them time. Does that mean nothing to you? It meant something. Ketzener just was not sure what. The Zenari fought for civilization, for progress, for the logical continuation of galactic order. Humans seemed to fight for each other, for people they barely knew, for strangers who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was also why humans kept surviving when they should not. The hyperspace alarm chimed. They were approaching the drop point. Ketzener felt his heart beat faster despite his attempts at calm. He had seen Vexler attack footage. He knew what they did to worlds. The creatures poured through dimensional tears like infected blood from a wound, consuming everything organic, breaking down matter into energy to feed their endless hunger. Threshold 9 should be a dead rock by now. The Eternal Ascent dropped from hyperspace with a shudder that Ketzener felt in his bones. The observation screens lit up with tactical data, and for a moment, everyone in the command center simply stared. Threshold 9 was still there. Still intact. Still fighting? Impossible, someone whispered. TES single quote Suzanne AR moved closer to the main display. The colony world spun below them, its surface marked with fires and explosions. The Vexler breach was visible from orbit, a writhing purple wound in reality itself, pouring out creatures that looked like nightmares made flesh. They swarmed across the colony's northern hemisphere, in numbers that made Ketzener's skin flash pale with horror, but they were not spreading. Somehow. Impossibly, the swarm was contained, pushed back in some places. The defensive lines formed a rough circle around the colony's main settlement, and those lines were holding. Get me a tactical analysis, Velthari ordered. How many defenders? Scanning now, Commander. The tactical officer's skin pulsed rapidly with confusion. I am reading approximately 43 human life signs in combat configuration. Zenari protocols indicate we should have multiple battalions for a breach this size. They are doing this with 43 soldiers? 43? Kethsunar could not hide his shock. There were 204 days ago. 157 casualties confirmed, the tactical officer reported quietly. They have been paying in blood for every hour they hold. The command center fell silent. Even the most experienced Zenari warriors understood what that meant. The humans had lost 3/4 of their force and were still fighting, still holding, still refusing to break. Prep drop teams, Velthari ordered. Full combat deployment. If those humans can hold for 4 days with nothing, we will show them what a proper military force can do. She turned to Kethsunar. Scholar, you are coming with us. You wanted to understand humans. You are about to get a much closer education. Kethsunar wanted to protest. He was a scientist, not a soldier. But he was also the fleet's foremost expert on human culture. And Velthari was right, he had spent years studying humanity from a safe distance. Perhaps it was time to see them up close. The dropship rattled and shook as it entered Threshold 9's atmosphere. Kethsunar strapped himself in beside 24 Zenari shock troops, their armor gleaming with graviton field generators. They were the best warriors the collective had to offer, trained for decades in combat techniques that humans could not even comprehend. And yet those humans down there, with their primitive kinetic weapons and their fragile bodies, had done what should have been impossible. The dropship pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Approaching landing zone Alpha? Human commander has marked a safe corridor for us. She says, and I quote, "Try not to scratch the paint." Several of the Zenari troops flickered with confusion. Kethsunar understood it was human humor, that strange coping mechanism they used when faced with horror. They made jokes about death while death surrounded them. It was, he had learned, how they stayed sane. The dropship touched down hard. The romp opened with a hiss of hydraulics, and Kethsunar got his first real look at a human battlefield. It was chaos made manifest. The air tasted of smoke and ozone and something else, something organic and wrong that made his skin crawl. Explosions lit the horizon in rhythmic pulses. The sound of weapons fire never stopped, a constant staccato that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and standing there, waiting to greet them, was a human. She was small by Zenari standards, barely reaching Kethsunar's chest. Her armor was scorched black in places, dented and cracked in others. Her face was gaunt with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of days without sleep. One arm hung at an odd angle, clearly injured but still functional enough to hold a weapon. She smiled at them. Actually smiled. "Took you long enough," Captain Sarah Chun said, her voice rough but steady. "We were starting to think you would miss the party." Kethsunar stared at her. This was the human who had held a dimensional breach for 4 days, who had watched 157 of her soldiers die, who stood here now, broken and bleeding, making jokes. "Captain Chun," Velthari said formally, "the Zenari Collective has arrived to provide support. Your defense is ... remarkable." "Remarkable is one word for it," Chun said. Her smile faded slightly. "Necessary is another. We have 3,000 civilians in the deep shelters that we could not evacuate in time. We told them we would hold until help came. So we held," she said it so simply, as if holding back an extra-dimensional swarm with 200 Marines, now 43, was just something you did. As if sacrifice was just another tactical option. "We should coordinate our forces," Velthari said. "Show us your defensive positions." Chun nodded and turned to lead them forward. As she walked, Kethsunar noticed how the other humans looked at her. With trust. With loyalty. With something that went beyond military discipline. They would follow her anywhere, he realized. Even into death, perhaps, Kethsunar thought as an explosion rocked the ground nearby, especially into death. "Stay close," Chun called back to them. "The Vexter have learned to hate humans specifically. They seem to take us personally, which is fine." Her smile returned, sharp and dangerous, because the feeling is very mutual. As they moved toward the front lines, Ketzener understood that everything he thought he knew about humans was about to be tested. And deep in his ancient genetic memory, in the parts of Zanari consciousness that remembered myths and legends from before recorded history, something whispered a warning. There were stories about humans. Old stories. Stories about the god-killers who refused to die properly. He was about to learn if those stories were true. Ketzener had seen battlefields before. He had studied warfare from every angle that his scholar's mind could analyze. But nothing in his decades of research had prepared him for what humans called a defensive position. It was madness given form. The colony's buildings had been systematically destroyed, but not by the Vexther. The humans had done it themselves, collapsing structures to create kill zones where the enemy would be exposed and vulnerable. They had turned the colony's fusion reactor, a device meant to power homes and factories, into a tactical weapon, cycling it to overload and create electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the Vexther-S coordination. Creative species, aren't they? Commander Valthari said, her skin pulsing with something like admiration. Captain Chun led them through the defensive maze with practiced ease. She moved like someone who had memorized every inch of ground through blood and necessity. Every few meters, they passed evidence of the fighting scorch marks, shell casings, and darker stains that Ketzener tried not to examine too closely. We hit them here, Chun explained, pointing to a collapsed office building that now formed a perfect choke point. They tried to swarm through 6 times. Lost count of how many we killed. They don't really die in the way we understand it. They just stop moving and dissolve back into energy. Makes body counts a bit difficult. Your tactics are unorthodox, Ketzener said carefully. Chun laughed, though the sound held no humor. Unorthodox is a polite word for it. We have been improvising for 4 days straight. When your back is against the wall and you have got monsters pouring through a hole in reality, you get creative real fast. They reached what Chun called the command post, a half-buried bunker that had once been a storage facility. Inside, maps covered every surface, marked with symbols and notes in multiple languages. Human and Zanari both, Ketzener noticed. They had been planning for reinforcements, hoping for help even when hope seemed impossible. A human medic was treating a wounded Zanari soldier in the corner. Ketzener stopped, surprised. When did your forces arrive? He asked the soldier. 2 hours ago, the Zanari warrior replied. His skin flickered with pain and something else, respect. Scouting unit. Ran into a Vexther ambush. Would have died if the humans had not pulled us out. Ketzener looked at the medic. She was young, barely into adulthood by human standards, and she had a bandage wrapped around her own shoulder that showed fresh blood. She was injured herself, yet she worked on the Zanari soldier with careful precision. You are hurt, Ketzener said to her. She glanced up, smiled tiredly. I can work hurt. He can't work dead. Simple math. You could have left him. Saved your medical supplies for your own people. The medic's expression hardened. We don't do that. You're with us now, which makes you family. We don't leave family behind. Family. The word struck something in Ketzener's consciousness. The Zanari had colleagues, had fellow citizens, had clan bonds. But this concept of instant, absolute loyalty to strangers simply because you fought beside them, that was purely human. An alarm started blaring. Chun's expression shifted instantly from exhausted to focused. Contact. Eastern perimeter. Large group? She grabbed her weapon and moved toward the exit. Welcome to the party, Zanari. Try to keep up? Ketzener followed, his gravity manipulation allowing him to glide smoothly over the broken terrain. Beside him, Valthari and her troops deployed in perfect formation, their graviton weapons humming with barely contained power. They were ready for whatever the Vexther could throw at them. What they found was worse than Ketzener had imagined. The Vexther came in waves, their forms shifting and morphing as they moved. Some walked on legs, some slithered, some flew on wings that should not exist in normal physics. They were violations of natural law given flesh, and they screamed with voices that hurt to hear. The humans met them with fire. Ketzener, watched in fascination as the human soldiers fought. They had no gravity manipulation, no energy shields, no advanced technology beyond their weapons. What they had was coordination born from desperation and creativity that defied prediction. A human sergeant called orders in a calm voice that somehow cut through the chaos. Miller, plasma charge on that cluster. Davidson, cover the left flank. Someone tell those Zanari beauties we could use their graviton cannons on that big, ugly bastard heading our way. The Zanari troops hesitated, unused to taking suggestions from humans. Velthari made the decision. You heard the sergeant? Target the large creature. The graviton cannons fired, beams of concentrated gravity that crushed matter into itself. The large Vexler creature, the size of a ground transport, collapsed into a ball of compressed mass and dissolved. But 3 more were already taking its place. Kethsunar found himself swept up in the rhythm of combat. He used his gravity manipulation to create barriers, deflecting Vexler charges and buying time for the human soldiers to reload and reposition. It felt strange, working so closely with another species. The Zanari usually fought as self-contained units. Each warrior a master of their craft, but the humans fought as a collective. Each one covering another's weakness, each one trusting their life to someone else's skill. When a human fell, and they did fall, their bodies too fragile to withstand the Vexler-S attacks another immediately took their place. No hesitation. No fear. Just grim determination. On your left! Someone shouted at Kethsunar. He turned to see a Vexler launching itself at him, claws extended. Before he could react, 3 plasma bolts caught the creature midair, burning through its mass and sending it crashing down. Captain Chun lowered her weapon. Stay alert, Prism. These things are fast. Prism? Kethsunar asked, confused. Your glow, she said with a quick grin. Reminds me of a prism splitting light. You needed a call sign. That is yours now. A call sign. A nickname. She had given him an identity within their unit without asking permission. It should have bothered him. Instead, he found it oddly pleasant. The battle raged for hours. Kethsunar lost track of time, lost track of everything except the immediate need to survive the next moment. He saw a human soldier use a Vexler corpse as an improvised explosive, detonating its unstable energy to clear a choke point. He saw another human carry a wounded Zanari warrior to safety under heavy fire, taking a hit that would have killed the Zanari. He saw Captain Chun coordinate attacks with a tactical brilliance that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with understanding how people, human and Zanari, both moved and fought. They are adapting to us, Velthari said during a brief lull in the fighting. The Vexler. They are learning our patterns. They always do, Chun replied. That is why we keep changing patterns. Predictability gets you killed. But constant adaptation requires immense mental flexibility, Kethsunar protested. Our soldiers train for decades to master set tactical responses. Chun looked at him with those exhausted, determined eyes. We train by staying alive. Every human soldier learns to improvise because our history is one long series of adapting or dying. We got very good at adapting. A new alarm sounded. This one was different, deeper, more urgent. Every human in the area stiffened. That is the breach alarm, Chun said quietly. Something big is coming through. They rushed to the eastern defensive line. Kethsunar could see the dimensional breach from here, that writhing purple wound in reality. It was expanding, growing larger as something massive pushed through from the other side. What emerged made Kethsunar skin flash white with pure terror. It was huge, the size of a building with too many limbs and too many eyes and a presence that felt wrong in ways that went beyond physical description. A Vexler broodlord, his training whispered. The queens of the swarm, the ones that coordinated the lesser creatures. Graviton cannons, Velthari ordered. Maximum power. We end this now. Wait, Chun said. Your cannons take time to charge? That thing will reach the civilian shelters before you can fire. Then what do you suggest? Chun's expression went very calm, very cold. Ketsuner recognized that look now. He had seen it before on other human faces. It was the look they got when they had made a decision that terrified them but that they would follow through on anyway. "We occupy it," Chun said. "We make it stop and fight us instead of advancing? Give your cannons the time they need?" "That is suicide," Ketsuner said. "Probably," Chun agreed. "But those civilians in the shelters, they have children. Families, people who matter. So yeah, we are going to buy them time. Because that is what humans do." She raised her voice, calling to her remaining soldiers. "Marines! Who is with me?" Every single human soldier present shouted affirmation. Not one hesitated. Not one questioned. Chun looked at Ketsuner. "You don't have to come, Prism. This isn't your fight." But it was. Somehow, in the past hours of fighting beside these impossible, stubborn, beautiful fools, it had become his fight too. "I am with you," Ketsuner said. Chun smiled. "Then let's go make a god bleed." They charge. 43 human soldiers and one Zanari scholar who had forgotten he was supposed to be an observer. They ran directly at a creature that could kill them with a single strike, and they did it without hesitation. The Broodlord noticed them. It stopped its advance toward the shelters and turned to face this tiny, insignificant threat, which was exactly what they needed. The Vexer did not stop coming. Ketsuner had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that destroying the Broodlord would slow the invasion. Instead, it seemed to enrage them. The dimensional breach pulsed with angry purple light, and the creatures that emerged moved with new purpose and fury. Worse, they were adapting. "They are targeting humans specifically now," Commander Velthari observed from the tactical station. Her skin flickered with concern. "Watch the pattern. When given a choice between human and Zanari targets, the Vexler choose humans nearly every time." Ketsuner had noticed it too. The swarm seemed to recognize humans as the greater threat, despite the Zanari having superior technology and firepower. It made no logical sense. The Zanari graviton weapons could kill dozens of Vexler with a single shot. Human kinetic weapons killed one at a time through sheer persistence. Yet the hive mind had learned something about humans. Something that made it prioritize their elimination above tactical efficiency. "They hate us," Captain Chun said simply. She was back on the line despite her broken arm, which the medics had splinted and secured. She had refused evacuation to the medical ship. The Vexler fought the Clorics and the Antheri before. Those species ran when they could not win. Humans don't run. I think it confuses them. Makes us a problem that needs solving. "You anthropomorphize them," Ketsuner said. "They are a hive mind from beyond normal space. They likely do not experience emotion as we understand it." Chun smiled grimly. "Maybe, but they still hate us. I can feel it. And you know what? The feeling is very mutual." Fleet Command had assigned Ketsuner to coordinate with the human forces directly. It made sense. He had studied their culture more than any other Zanari, and his experience in the field yesterday proved he could work alongside them. What Fleet Command did not realize was how much the assignment would change him. He found himself embedded with Chun's command squad, the core group of soldiers who had survived from the beginning. They called him Prism now, like it was his real name. They shared their rations with him even though human and Zanari biology were different. They included him in their jokes and their songs and their strange rituals for honoring the dead over the next 36 hours of continuous combat. Ketsuner learned more about humanity than he had in 30 years of academic study. He met Sergeant Marcus Webb, who wrote poetry between firefights. The human would crouch behind cover, weapon ready, and compose verses about Earth's mountains and oceans on scraps of paper. When Ketsuner asked why, Webb said, "Keeps me human. Keeps me remembering what we are fighting for. I write about beauty because I am surrounded by ugliness. Balance, you know?" Ketsuner did not know. Zanari soldiers maintained emotional equilibrium through meditation and bioluminescent synchronization. But watching Webb write about sunrise while covered in mud and blood somehow made more sense than it should. he saw humans share their last rations with wounded Zanari soldiers, giving away their own food to help injured aliens they had met days ago. When he questioned this inefficiency, suggesting they save resources for their own survival, a human corporal named Davis looked at him like he had said something offensive. "They are hurt. We have food? What is complicated about this?" Davis said, "You fight beside us. You are one of us. That is how it works. One of us." The humans adopted people into their tribe with a speed and completeness that amazed Kethsener. There were no probation periods, no tests of loyalty. You fought with them, you were family. Simple as that. Most striking was how they dealt with fear. Zanari training involved controlling fear through rational thought and mental discipline. Humans seemed to acknowledge their fear completely and then do terrifying things anyway. They sang when they were scared. Actually sang. Someone would start a song, often something from Earth's long history, and others would join in. The words were usually about fighting or dying or going home. The tunes were often simple and repetitive, but the effect was profound. The singing kept their spirits up, kept them connected to each other even when separated by distance and fire. Kethsener found himself humming along sometimes, not knowing the words but understanding the purpose. "Why do humans sing in combat?" he asked Chun during a brief quiet moment. They were reinforcing a defensive position, piling rubble to create better cover. Chun paused in her work, considering the question. "I guess because we are scared, and singing reminds us we are not alone. Every voice you hear is a person who is still alive, still fighting with you. It is a way of saying I am here, you are not alone without using those words. That is remarkably simple. The best things usually are." Chun replied. The theological questions began gnawing at Kethsener's mind during the second night of combined operations. The Zanari had ancient texts, preserved from before their species achieved spaceflight. Among them were fragments of myths about something called the God Killers, a race that had supposedly overthrown their creators and driven the elder gods from the galaxy, Keth. Xanar had always dismissed these as primitive superstition, the kind of creation myths every young species developed. But watching humans fight with such intensity, such refusal to acknowledge limits or accept defeat, he began to wonder. He accessed the Zanari historical database through his neural link, searching for references to the God Killers. The myths were fragmentary and contradictory, as myths always were, but certain details repeated across multiple sources. The God Killers were described as stubborn beyond reason. They fought with tools when they had no claws. They refused to die properly, getting back up when they should have stayed down. They adapted faster than their enemies could predict. They turned defeat into legends that inspired future generations. They sounded exactly like humans. "Scholar Kethsener," Velthari's voice crackled over his communicator. "We have a situation. Eastern perimeter. Large breach opening." He rushed to the location. What he found made his skin flash white with horror. A massive Vexler creature was emerging from the breach, not a broodlord, but something worse. It was the size of a small building, with dozens of limbs and a body that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. Its presence distorted reality around it, making the air shimmer and twist. "Graviton cannons cannot get a lock," Velthari reported. "It keeps phasing between dimensions. Our targeting systems cannot predict where it will be." Chun studied the creature through her weapon scope. "Then we do it the old way. Manual targeting? Intelligent prediction based on pattern recognition. That would require someone to be close enough to observe and communicate targeting data," Kethsener said. "Close enough to be in extreme danger." "Yeah," Chun agreed. She was already moving toward the creature. "I know." "Captain, wait," but she was already running, her command squad following without question. Kethsener found himself running too, his gravity manipulation allowing him to keep pace. They got close, dangerously close. Close enough to see the creature's alien anatomy shifting and reforming. Close enough to smell the ozone stench of dimensional distortion. Chun called out observations to Velthari, describing the creature's movement patterns, the slight delay before it phased. The predictable rhythm to its dimensional shifts, the creature noticed them. A limb lashed out, moving faster than anything that size should move. Ketsanar threw up a gravity barrier, deflecting the strike but feeling his energy reserves drain dramatically. "Got it!" Velthari's voice came through, firing in 3.2. Another limb struck from a different angle. The gravity barrier held but shattered under the impact. Ketsanar staggered backward, his bioluminescence flickering with exhaustion. Chun grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Stay with me, Prism. We are almost there." The graviton cannons fired. This time the shots connected, catching the creature mid-phase. It shrieked, a sound that made Ketsanar's neural pathways ache and collapsed into itself. They had done it together, human creativity and Zanari technology working as one dot as they withdrew to safer positions. Ketsanar noticed something. The other humans were looking at him differently. Not as an alien observer anymore, but as one of them. He had run into danger beside their captain. He had held the line while they worked. He was, in their eyes, family now. "Not bad for a scholar," Chun said, grinning despite her obvious exhaustion. "You might have a future in this whole fighting business." "I sincerely hope not," Ketsanar replied, though he found himself smiling too. "One experience with human-style warfare is quite enough." "That is what they all say," Sergeant Webb commented. "Then you go home and everything is too quiet, too calm, and you find yourself missing the chaos, missing the people you fought beside." Ketsanar wanted to say that would not happen to him. But looking at these humans, these impossible, stubborn, beautiful fools who had made him one of them, he suspected Webb might be right. The next crisis came at dawn on the 7th day. The Vexler launched a coordinated assault across all defensive lines simultaneously. It was a final push, using everything the swarm had left. The Zanari fleet engaged from orbit, their massive weapons carving paths of destruction through the enemy ranks, but on the ground, the defenders were being overwhelmed. "All units, fall back to the inner perimeter," Fleet Command ordered. "Prepare for evacuation to orbital positions." Ketsanar saw Chen's expression harden. Day 7 of the siege. Ketsanar had lost track of how many hours he had been awake. His bioluminescence had faded to a dull glow, barely visible even in the darkness. His energy reserves were dangerously low. Every use of his gravity manipulation felt like dragging weights through mud. But the humans were worse off. They were made of flesh and bone, not the semi-crystalline structures of the Zanari. They needed sleep, needed food, needed rest. They had none of these things. 27 soldiers remained combat effective from the original 200. Their armor was shattered, their weapons jury-rigged from spare parts. Their bodies held together by will and medical tape. And still they fought. "Commander." Velthari's voice crackled over the communication channel. "All forces, this is Fleet Command. We are ordered to evacuate to orbital positions. The Vexler numbers are too great. We will sterilize the planet from space rather than risk the breach expanding beyond containment." Ketsanar felt his heart sink. Sterilization meant exactly what it sounded like, burning the entire planet's surface with plasma weapons. Nothing would survive, including the 3,000 civilians still trapped in the deep shelters. Captain Chun stood at the command post, staring at the tactical display. Her face was hollow with exhaustion, but her eyes remained sharp. Calculating, always calculating. "How long until the shelters can be evacuated?" she asked the evacuation coordinator. "Minimum 2 hours to reach them, load everyone, and get clear," came the reply. "The tunnels are partially collapsed. It will be slow." "Fleet Command, how long do we have before you start sterilization?" A pause, then 30 minutes, Captain. "I'm sorry. We cannot risk the breach expanding. The mathematics are clear." June closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then she opened them and straightened her shoulders. "Understood, Command. But we respectfully decline evacuation." "Captain, that is not a request. That is a direct order, and we are refusing it." "Sir, with all due respect, you can court-martial us later if any of us survive." But we are not leaving 3,000 people to burn. We told them we would hold. So we hold. She cut the channel before command could respond. Then she turned to her remaining Marines. They stood in a rough circle around her, these battered survivors who had become more than soldiers. They had become family through shared suffering. You all heard that, Chun said quietly. Fleet wants us out. The civilians cannot be evacuated in time. If we stay, we probably die. If we leave, they definitely die. She paused, meeting each soldier's eyes in turn. I am staying. But I am not ordering any of you to stay with me. This is not a military order. This is personal choice. Anyone who wants to evacuate, go now. No shame in that. You have all already done more than anyone could ask. Nobody moved. Sergeant Webb spoke first. Ma'am, with respect, where else would we go? This is what we do. This is who we are. Besides, Corporal Davis added, someone has to make sure you don't do anything stupid, Captain. Chun laughed. It was a tired sound, but genuine. Pretty sure staying here qualifies as stupid, Davis. Then we are all stupid together. Wouldn't be the first time. The Marines voted without words, simply moving back to their positions. Not one of them evacuated. Not one of them even hesitated. Kessner watched this and felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. The Zanari followed orders because they trusted in the collective wisdom of their leaders. These humans were refusing orders because they trusted in something else, something deeper than military hierarchy or survival probability. They trusted each other. And they had made a promise to people they would never meet. Fleet Command is not going to be happy, Valthari said. She had stayed too, along with 24 Zanari soldiers who had fought beside the humans. They will call this mutiny. Let them, Chun said. I would rather face court-martial than live knowing I abandoned people who counted on me. Kethsener moved to stand beside her. I am staying as well. Chun looked at him in surprise. Prism, you are a scholar. This is not your fight. You have already seen what you came to see. No, Kethsener said slowly, I do not think I have. Not yet. The truth was, he needed to understand. His entire life had been devoted to studying the patterns of history, the rise and fall of civilizations. He had spent decades examining why some species endured while others faded. And here, on this burning colony world, he was watching the answer unfold in real time. Why do humans fight this way? He asked Chun. Your species' history is full of retreat and tactical withdrawal. You understand the mathematics of survival. Yet, when it truly matters, you refuse to run even when running is logical. Why? Chun considered the question while checking her weapon's ammunition. You want the academic answer or the real one? Both, please. Academic answer. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We could not outrun prey or outfight predators, so we learned to just keep going until everything else gave up. That got wired into our brains over millions of years. We are literally built to be stubborn. And the real answer? Chin smiled, and there was something ancient in that expression. Something that connected this exhausted soldier to every human who had ever stood against impossible odds. Because surrender is just slow death, she said. We learned that over and over throughout our history. Ice ages came and we either adapted or died, so we adapted. Plagues came and we either found cures or died, so we found cures. We fought wars that should have ended us, and we either learned to be better or died, so we learned. Every time we were faced with extinction, we had two choices, give up or fight. We are the descendants of the ones who fought. It is in our blood now. It is who we are. She gestured to her Marines. Every human here comes from a long line of survivors who refused to die properly. My ancestors survived the Chinese civil wars. Webb's people survived slavery and genocide. Davis's family walked out of the Siberian winter during the nuclear exchange. We are all children of the stubborn ones. The ones who said not today to death and meant it. Kethsener felt pieces clicking together in his mind. The ancient Zanari texts spoke of the god-killers, the beings who overthrew their creators. He had always imagined them as powerful warriors, as masters of technology. But what if he had been wrong? Your species has ancient history, he said carefully. 50,000 years ago, maybe longer. Do you have records of encounters with other spacefaring species? Chun frowned. That is before recorded history. We have archaeological evidence of something weird happening around that time. Some of our ancestor populations nearly went extinct, then suddenly exploded in numbers and spread across the planet. Some scientists think we met something from the stars, but it is all speculation. Kethsunner accessed his data files, pulling up the god-killer myths. The Zanari have legends. Stories about a race that encountered the progenitors, the first spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. The progenitors were billions of years old, masters of technology we cannot even imagine. According to the myths, they tried to cull the god-killers as dangerous, too adaptable, too unpredictable. But the god-killers survived. With nothing but stone tools and fire, they survived. And then they thrived. And the progenitors... He paused. The progenitors vanished. You think that was us? Chun asked. You think ancient humans met these progenitors? I think your ancestors met gods, Kethsunner said quietly. And they looked at those gods covered in scars, using rocks and fire, refusing to die properly, and the gods were terrified. Because they recognized something, what? Equals who would never stop. An explosion rocked the command post. The final Vexler assault had begun. The swarm came in numbers that blacked out the sky, a tide of alien horror that should have drowned any defense immediately. Chun grabbed her weapon. Philosophy later, survival now. Let's go make our ancestors proud. They fought like demons, like gods, like desperate creatures who knew this might be the end but refused to make it easy. Kethsunner used his gravity manipulation in ways his training had never covered, creating barriers and weapons and traps that he invented in the moment. Beside him, humans fought with a ferocity that transcended tactics or training. They fought like their ancestors had fought saber-toothed cats and Ice Age winters, with creativity, with courage, with absolute refusal to quit, minutes stretched into hours. The defensive lines bent but did not break. When weapons ran dry, the humans used their fists and pieces of rubble. When armor failed, they used their bodies as shields for each other. And all the while, the evacuation teams worked in the shelters below, loading civilians onto transport ships as fast as they could. Captain Chun was everywhere, directing fire, closing gaps in the line, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. Her broken arm had broken again, Kethsunner noticed. She did not seem to care. Evacuation team to command, a voice crackled over the channel. First transport away. 900 civilians aboard. Going back for the rest. Copy that, Chun replied. She looked at her Marines, at the Zanari soldiers who had stayed with them, at Kethsunner. We are doing it. We are actually doing it. But the Vexler knew it too. They pushed harder, throwing everything they had at the defenders. A breach opened in the western line. Vexler poured through like water through a crack. I have got it, Chun said. She was already moving, a handful of Marines following her. Captain, wait. Kethsunner called, but she was gone. The Zanari fleet sterilized Threshold 9, from orbit 3 hours after the last civilian transport cleared the atmosphere. Kethsunner watched from the observation deck of the Eternal Ascent as plasma fire carved through the planet's surface, sealing the dimensional breach in a burst of energy that would be visible for light years. The colony was gone. The breach was sealed. The Vexler invasion had been stopped before it could spread to other worlds. By any military calculation. It was a victory. Kethsunner did not feel victorious. Of the 200 human Marines who had refused evacuation 7 days ago, only 7 survived. 193 had died buying time for strangers to escape. The Zanari had suffered 40% casualties, terrible losses for any military force. But the humans had given 96% of their force, and they had done it willingly. Commander Velthari found him at the observation deck 3 days later. As the fleet made its way back to Zanari space, her bioluminescence pulsed with concern when she saw him. Kethsonar had barely moved from this spot, his skin dim with exhaustion and something else. Something new. "Scholar," Valthari said gently, "you need to eat, rest. You have been standing here for days." "I am writing a report," Kethsonar replied. His eyes did not leave the stars beyond the window. "Fleet Command wants my analysis of human combat effectiveness. They want tactical recommendations for future joint operations." "That can wait." "No, it cannot." Kethsonar finally looked at her. "Because I finally understand something that has puzzled xenorchaeologists for generations. I understand why the elder races vanished." Valtharia's skin flickered with curiosity. "I thought they were destroyed. Natural disasters, cosmic events, the eventual heat death that claims all civilizations. That is what we assumed," Kethsonar said. "But the evidence never quite fit. The progenitors, the architects, the dreamweavers, all the ancient races that supposedly ruled the galaxy billions of years ago. They left ruins, left technology, left traces of civilizations so advanced we cannot even comprehend their achievements. But they left no bodies. No clear evidence of how they died. They just stopped. And you think you know why?" Kethsonar gestured to the space where Threshold 9 had been. "I think they met humans. Or beings like humans. Creatures who fight not because victory is probable, but because surrender is impossible. And I think it terrified them." He pulled up his datapad, showing Valthari the ancient texts he had been studying. The god-killer myths, the fragmentary records of the progenitors' final days, the archaeological evidence of human ancestors surviving what should have been extinction events 50,000 years ago. "Look at the pattern," Kethsonar said, his voice taking on the intensity of a scholar making a breakthrough. "Humans have been dying since they stood upright. Ice ages, predators, diseases, wars, they have faced extinction dozens of times in their evolutionary history. And every single time, when any sane species would have laid down and accepted death, humans said, 'Not today,' and kept fighting. That is admirable. But you do not understand," Kethsonar interrupted. "It is not just admirable, it is terrifying. Because it means humans can never be truly defeated. You can kill them, yes. You can destroy their cities, burn their worlds, slaughter them by the billions. But you cannot make them quit. There will always be survivors. And those survivors will remember. They will adapt. They will find new ways to fight. They will teach their children to fight. And eventually, inevitably, they will win." He called up footage from the Threshold 9 defense. Images of human soldiers fighting with broken weapons and shattered armor, singing while they died, making jokes about death while death surrounded them. "The progenitors were gods," Kethsonar continued, "beings of pure energy who manipulated reality itself. They had technology that could crack planets and halt stars. And 50,000 years ago they encountered human ancestors' creatures with stone tools and fire. The progenitors saw these primitive beings spreading across Earth, saw their potential for violence and adaptation, and they tried to cull them, to eliminate the threat before it could become dangerous. But the humans survived," Valthari said quietly. "They more than survived. They thrived. With nothing but rocks and fire and that stubborn, irrational, beautiful human refusal to die properly, they survived contact with gods. And the progenitors looked at these scarred, bleeding, stubborn creatures who kept getting back up when they should have stayed down, and they recognized something that filled them with existential dread. What? Equals, Kethsonar said simply. Not equals in power or technology, but equals in the only way that ultimately matters. They would never stop, never quit, never accept defeat. The progenitors could kill 1 billion humans, and the next generation would find new ways to fight. They could destroy Earth itself, and humans would spread to the stars and come back. There was no victory condition against an enemy that refused to acknowledge loss. Valthari was silent for a long moment. So the progenitors fled? I believe so. They looked at humanity and saw their own eventual defeat. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not for 1 million years. But eventually, because humans play the long game, they turn every loss into a lesson, every death into a story that inspires the next generation. They are immortal not as individuals but as a species. And that, Kethsunner's skin pulsed with something like awe. That is the most dangerous thing a god can face. An enemy that learns from death. An enemy that cannot be broken. He turned back to his report. I am recommending that the Zanari Collective never, under any circumstances, make an enemy of humanity. Because we would lose. Not today. Maybe not in our lifetimes. But eventually we would lose, and if we remain alive. For the first time since Captain Chin's death, Kethsunner's bioluminescence brightened slightly. Then we become part of their story. And there are worse fates than being remembered in human legends. 6 months later, Kethsunner stood in the memorial gardens on the Zanari homeworld. It was a quiet place, filled with crystalline monuments to the fallen. The Zanari honored their dead by recording their names in structures that would last millennia, ensuring they would never be forgotten. A new section had been added recently. A joint memorial for the defense of Threshold 9. Zanari and human names side by side, carved in both languages. It was unprecedented. The Zanari had never before honored alien dead alongside their own. But then, no aliens had ever fought like those humans had. Kessner found Captain Sarah Chun's name. He had learned a human tradition during his time at Threshold 9. When visiting graves, you brought a small stone to show you had been there. He placed one now, a smooth piece of Zanari crystal that caught the light. We sealed the breach, he said quietly to the memorial. The Vexter have not broken through since. Your sacrifice mattered. All 3,000 civilians survived. Your Marines, the 7 who lived, they are training other soldiers now, teaching them to fight like humans do. The contagion is spreading. He paused, his bioluminescence pulsing in patterns of respect and sorrow. I finished my report. Fleet Command did not believe half of it. They think I exaggerated, that I allowed emotion to cloud my scientific judgment. But I know what I saw. I know what you taught me. A voice spoke behind him. I heard you fought at Threshold-9. Double quotes, KETH single quotes, Zan AR turned. A young human stood there, wearing the uniform of the Human Zanari Joint Defense Force. The program was new, established after Threshold 9, humans and Zanari training together. Learning from each other. I did, Kethsunner confirmed. I fought beside Captain Chen's Marines. The human's expression shifted into something deep and meaningful. A connection formed across the gap between species. Then you are family, the human said simply, offering his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Kethsunner hesitated. Then he took the offered hand, feeling the warm solidity of human flesh against his crystalline fingers. Family, he repeated, testing the word. It felt right. My name is Lieutenant James Park, the human said. I am here to learn from the Zanari, to understand how you fight, how you think, so we can be better allies. And I am still here learning from humans, Kethsunner replied. I suspect it will take more than one lifetime to understand your species completely. Park smiled. Most humans do not understand humans completely. We are complicated. But we are loyal. Once you are family forever. They stood together at the memorial, human and Zanari, looking at the names of the fallen. Around them, other joint species groups moved through the gardens. This was the new reality, the Zanari and humanity standing together. Learning from each other, the galaxy had changed at Threshold 9, not because of technology or tactics, but because two species had fought side by side and learned what it meant to be family. Kethsunner thought about his report, the classified document that would be read by Zanari leaders for generations. His conclusion had been simple but profound, that the elder races were right to fear humanity. Not because humans were powerful, they were not compared to the ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy, but because humans possessed something more dangerous than power. They possessed unbreakable will. They turned every ending into a story, every loss into legend, every defeat into a reason for the next generation to rise stronger. You could not defeat that. You could not destroy it.